department, and also at National Museums Liverpool, where I'm an honorary research fellow in classical antiquities. And one of my big interests is looking at works of art, particularly from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the age of the great excavations, and looking to see how these classical finds from both the Greek and Roman periods were embraced by painters of the late 19th, early 20th centuries. Now, today I've selected the work to talk about as Artemis by John Collier. So moving on to showing you what the picture actually looks like, I think it's worth saying that, you know, as Joe mentioned, we've always done these in-house before, and you've had the pleasure of either sitting around the painting or having it in a lecture theatre for you to actually look at. So many thanks to Joe for sending me this lovely image of it. Because it's only an image and it's not the real thing, I won't be talking about artistic techniques. I won't be talking about any areas of the painting which I can see have been restored. So I'll really be focusing on the subject matter. So what can you see here? Well, sure, you can see the young athletic woman. She's barefoot. She's wearing a short costume which doesn't restrict her movement in any way. At least one of her breasts is bare, and she's just fired an arrow, one of the arrows from the quiver, which you can see just over her right shoulder. So what I'm going to be talking about today is, even without John Collier's title, could we identify this person as having the name Artemis? And I think that it's worth saying that you can actually see down in the bottom here that John Collier has signed the work. So it was painted by John Collier, John Maler Collier, to distinguish him from the other John Colliers. In terms of size, it's actually something that would be suitable for a domestic setting, admittedly quite an elite domestic setting. You've got the dimensions on the screen, but you know, as you can see, you know, from long ways end to end, it's under 90 centimeters, so you know, it's perfectly good for a domestic setting. And for those of you who perhaps have either been to my talks before or are regulars in the Atkinson Gallery in Southport, Lilith, the lovely painting of Lilith, which I will show you in a moment, that painting is 2 meters tall. And another painting I've spoken about by John Collier in the Venusberg, that's closer to 2.5 meters tall. So you will see this is very much more a domestic painting. And it's now, of course, in the collections of the Atkinson at Southport. If anyone is interested in researching it further, I have enclosed details of the accession number. The BOO prefix indicates that it was transferred from Bootle Art Gallery. For those of you who aren't local, Bootle is a town also within the Sefton Council District, but somewhat south. It's really between, well, Liverpool and Southport. And as a result of local government reorganisation in the mid-1970s, which I think some of you may remember, that the painting, together actually with Lilith and some others, was transferred from its home in the Bootle Town Hall in the former Museum and Art Gallery to the Atkinson in Southport. And again, those of you who will know the Atkinson as visitors, will notice that there is a certain similarity in terms of civic architecture. This is honestly the Bootle Art Gallery and not the Atkinson. I know it's got the same very distinctive high tower and the spire on top. But the one disadvantage that we do have as researchers is that the works which were transferred from Bootle don't have a good collections history. So, for example, if I wanted to know who owned it beforehand, how it was acquired, was it a donation, was it purchased, was it in the hands of another collector? We really don't know. So between John Collier painting the work in around 1900 right through to the 1970s, we don't have a lot of information. However, as I mentioned, even though we're not looking at the picture today itself, I hope that I can talk about who the artist was, who Artemis was, and I mentioned that she just loosed her bow. So who or what was she hunting? What was her prey? But also as well, the changing image of Artemis. So what actually inspired John Collier to paint Artemis in this way? As we will see, there are other ways. I think it's also worthwhile me saying that I'm going to concentrate on ancient images of Artemis. So images from the ancient Greek and Roman period. Artemis has proved an inspiration to artists of more modern times, both in her guise as Artemis, but also as well as the Roman Diana. And so, I mean, I'm thinking just things that people may have come across. There's paintings in the national collections of Diana and Callisto, or Diana and Actaeon. It's a lovely picture of Artemis and Chione, done in the 1930s in the collections of the Harris Art Gallery in Preston, so perhaps not too far away for some of you to visit. So it just was saying that for the purposes of this short talk, we're not going to be able to cover all the different images of Artemis that do exist. So first of all, who was John Collier? So fortunately, we've got a lovely portrait of him. This is fantastic. John Collier had a long life. He was born in the middle of the 19th century and he died in 1934. So he did reach a good age. And here he is being shown with all the tools of his trade. So a portrait of an artist. This portrait in the collections of the National Portrait Gallery, talk about keeping it in the family. The artist was his first wife, Maler Collier, often known as Maiden, who you can see from this, she's a talented artist herself. And she's got really nice likeness of her husband, but as I say, she was a talented artist herself. She was a member of the renowned Huxley family. Her father, who was Thomas Henry Huxley, was the individual who was closely associated with the theories of Charles Darwin. Those theories of evolution in the later 19th century. So she was from a learned family. And she did come from a family of sisters as well. So although you can see Collier painting Marion in left profile here, attempts to find the actual portrait have proved elusive. There is one in the National Portrait Gallery's collection showing Marion in right profile, so facing the other way. And in fact, the curators of the National Portrait Gallery have suggested that this portrait may not have actually existed. And in fact, one of the images Collier was working at the time this work was created, between 1882 and 1883, was a portrait of, what is a triple portrait actually, of Marion and two of her sisters. This is quite relevant actually, because Marion sadly died quite young. And John Collier's second wife was actually Ethel, one of Marion's sisters. The marriage couldn't take place in Britain. Legally, it wasn't permitted to marry your late wife's sister. So the couple got married in Norway, I understand. But Collier's name is often associated with Pre-Raphaelite brotherhood, but he was never. He was never a Pre-Raphaelite. Although it's really obvious why people talk about that. I mean, for example, if you look at works by the Pre-Raphaelite brotherhood, you will see hidden on some of the paintings, you know, PRB there, and I'd say although they did share some of the subjects, and clearly say he had a long and very distinguished career. He was an excellent portraitist, and as we know from the Atkinson's own collection, he was a very talented history painter too, even though some of the renderings are quite imaginative. So here is a great crowd favourite at the Atkinson. Whenever I've done a face-to-face talk and mentioned Lilith, there's always been murmurs of approval, which is absolutely super. Lilith, I understand, thanks to Joe, is actually on her holidays at the moment. The painting has gone on loan to the Netherlands at present, so that it's not on display for you to look at. But as well as Lilith, which has been reproduced many times, if you go in the Atkinson shop, you'll definitely be able to buy something with Lilith on. Perhaps not so quite well known is another painting which I gave a gallery talk on in the past, Collier's In the Venusberg, which has that scene from Wagner's opera Tannhäuser, where you can see here the wearing his suit of armor. You can see him visiting the goddess Venus and her companions on the hill known as the Venusberg. She only has one companion there at present. But actually Collier's work spreads far and wide. And another classical theme, which is possibly the furthest away I could find from the Atkinson, is his image of a priestess of Delphi, which is in Adelaide in the Art Gallery of South Australia. And again, showing the priestess over the crack in the dighton of the Temple of Apollo, where the fumes came out, which sent her into a trance, so that she could make pronouncements. So here I think, you know, you have got a mixture of historical, quasi-historical, cultural themes, and as we know from the Artemis at the Atkinson, things which are directly based on the classics. So first of all, let's look in some detail at who Artemis actually was. Now, she is best known as the Greek goddess of hunting, although it is worth saying that she did have other responsibilities in inverted commas. So she had a concern with childbirth, with women in childbirth, the protection of women in childbirth. She was also famous as a virgin goddess. She was also associated with the moon. However, I would suggest that the way in which Collier has shown her is actually the most typical. And as I trust that you can see from this image here, that here Artemis is shown holding a bow and accompanied not by a hunting dog. It is actually something that she will be hunting. So it is what looks to me like quite a young deer. This oil flask, a lekithos is a Greek term we use, dates to around 470 BC and is attributed to the Orithyia painter. It's in a museum in the US, the Chaser Museum of Art in Wisconsin, and it shows Artemis in what I would consider to be perhaps a very typical 5th century mode. So she's wearing a cloak, a himation, over the top of her garment, a floor-length chiton, which appears to be made of quite a thin material, so it's not like a heavy woolen peplos. You can see the cloth goes into several little folds. It's quite an attractive effect. If it was from the early 20th century in Western Europe, we would probably say, it's like a dress by Fortuny or something like that. So this is how she would normally be shown. So again, who was she? Well, she's got this great family history. Her mother, who you can see on the slide here and also here, was mortal. She wasn't a goddess, and her name was Leto. The father was Zeus, very important deity indeed. If you think more in Roman terms, it's really equivalent to the Roman god Jupiter. The Roman god Jupiter. So Leto and Zeus had twins. One was Artemis and the other was Apollo. And here on this absolutely delightful pot in the collections of the British Museum in London, you can see here the proud mother, Leto, holding her twins, Apollo and Artemis, accompanied by, I'm sure you can see here, those of you who know your Greek mythology would recognize this gentleman instantly as Dionysus, the god of wine, also the god of theatre. And the hero over here is Hermes, with his very distinctive little hat and his very distinctive caduceus, his staff. Over here, we see the twins grown up with their mum. So here is Leto again. She actually has the god Ares, the god of war, standing behind her. But here, carrying his traditional attribute of a lyre, is Apollo, and just behind him, again, carrying her quiver of arrows, but also having the skin of an animal who presumably she's killed, draped around her, is Artemis. And I say this lovely vessel is in the Museo Arqueológico in Madrid. But if anyone is interested in continuing their research into this topic, I have tried wherever possible to include the sources of where I've got the photos from. So you should be able to look them up quite easily afterwards if you wish. Now my focus today is obviously going to be on the visual record. We really don't have the time to talk too much about literature, but I think it's fair to say that it would be wrong for me not to mention that Artemis does feature in Homeric epic. So in the Iliad, she's described not only as someone who hunts, a hunter, but also as Potnia Theron, that is the mistress of the animals. And here on this vessel from the Musée du Louvre in Paris, you can see our goddess here, our Artemis, holding very wild animals, actually 2 lions, by their back legs. Gosh, I should have issued a warning of animal cruelty here. It's not good what the ancient gods and goddesses got up to, not just with animals, but also people, as we'll see. So in the Iliad, book 21, 535, Homer mentioned Artemis, huntress, queen of beasts. So she linked, so the two attributes are linked. And it is interesting that clearly this mastery of the animals, this is actually quite an old motif. I'm stopping myself from talking about the Aegean Bronze Age today, but certainly I think it is just worth flagging up that the motif of a mistress of the animals is actually a very old one. And I mentioned more recent depictions of Artemis stroke Diana, and here is one. But worth saying that Artemis also gets mentioned in Homer's Odyssey. So, for example, here, in comparing the Skerian princess Nausicaa to Artemis, in book 6, have the line references there, as lithe as Artemis with her arrows, striding down from a high peak, thrilled to race with the wild boar or bounding deer, and nymphs of the hills race with her. So there you can see Artemis in the center here. Just look, her attribute of the moon is shown as a crescent on top of her head, almost as a headdress, and she's holding aloft her bow and her quiver of arrows. Now, although it looks as though there's a lot of young ladies sitting around here, rather than racing with the wild boar and bounding deer, this I thought was actually quite a good representation of Artemis with her nymphs of the hills. I will be coming back to this picture, so I won't talk about the people who are peering out from the bush to the right of the picture. Here you see that Domenichino in the early 17th century, in his painting La Caccia di Diana, the hunt of Diana, has actually named the picture for Diana, which was, to be honest, the norm for the time, rather than Artemis herself. So turning to what Artemis may or may not be hunting. Now, obviously, we've seen Artemis standing next to what looks like quite an innocent little deer. We've also seen her wearing the skin of an animal, looks like a deer to me, who she's previously killed with her bow and arrow. So turning back to the Collier painting, it's really noticeable that you cannot see whether she's accompanied in the hunt. I mean, she's certainly shown alone. And the thing you really can't see is who or what she is hunting. One suggestion is that she may have been tracking down Actaeon. A poor chap you can see on the right of this piece of Greek painted pottery here on the screen. Actaeon was a hunter from Thebes in central Greece, and not the Egyptian Thebes. And it is clear that Actaeon received what looks like an absolutely horrendous punishment of being attacked by a large pack of dogs. He must have offended the goddess Artemis in some way. I think that because the sources differ, I really don't want to say, oh, it was definitely this then. Euripides in the Bacchae, which was written and performed first in 405 BC, Euripides related that Actaeon had boasted, he'd been showing off, saying that he was a better hunter than Artemis, and in retaliation, basically Artemis decreed that he should be eaten by his own dogs. And you can see that they're really having a go there. I mean, despite the fact that he's crying out pitifully, I'm pretty sure that Artemis is drawing her bow, not to put him out of his misery, but to inflict greater punishment. I did say, didn't I, that you know, the ancient gods and goddesses weren't always nice to animals. They really weren't nice to people either. Here you can see again this pot, just like one that I showed you previously, dated around 470, and there is Artemis in the ankle-length robe. It doesn't look terribly suitable for running around a field to me, but this is in line with the artistic conventions of the time. Now, later authors relate that Actaeon saw her naked, so they had a kind of racy sideline to this. For example, Callimachus, writing in the Hellenistic period, 3rd to 2nd centuries BC, in his hymn 5, suggests this as a reason for Actaeon's horrible death. I've actually included something which is most positively not from the Hellenistic period. It's detailed from a crater, that is a mixing vessel, attributed to the wonderfully named painter of the woolly satyrs. If I actually was showing you a Dionysiac scene by someone who has these artistic characteristics in the way he or she painted, if it included a satyr, you would see why the sobriquet woolly satyrs has been attributed to this artistic hand. I think he's actually pretty good at woolly dogs as well. This one seems much furrier and fluffier than the other one, and actually compared to the number of dogs that he had set on him last time, that his pack of dogs was fairly small, because frankly this one here seems more interested in the figure, presumably, of Hermes departing stage right. But I also want you to take note as well of the image of the chariot driving this time, the chariot driving Artemis. Although these look like giraffes, I strongly suspect that what we're looking at here is the woolly satyr painter's rendering of deer. But yet again, here we are, mid-5th century, and Artemis is still shown as someone who doesn't look, by her mode of dress, appropriately costumed to be running through a field. She certainly had to be doing the trick that many of us girls did at school, of hoisting our skirts up to try to run quickly on the sports field. She is certainly not dressed for that. Just keep all this at the back of your mind. Now, also in the version of Ovid, Ovid was a Roman poet who spanned the first century BC, 1st century AD. He also wrote in his Metamorphoses that Actaeon saw her naked. And again, we think that you see this figure here lurking in the bushes, watching what appears to be, admittedly, a semi-clad Artemis stroke Diana. Certainly some of her companions have already stripped off to bathe. It looks very much as though Artemis is in mid-undressing, so she's throwing her bows and arrows away, she's going to be stripping off her dress, and that is why Actaeon is punished in this way. It's something I can't really go into because of the length of the talk, but it is quite interesting that in these post-antique renderings of the Diana and Actaeon story, you don't really see the brutality perhaps of some of these ancient Greek depictions of this myth, that often you are looking perhaps at the slightly more racy scene, which includes loads of naked and semi-naked young women, which was clearly the patrons of the 17th century and later were looking for. But another suggestion, and this is, if you thought that was a gruesome myth, this is actually a pretty bad one. Could the prey be the children of Niobe, wife of the king of Thebes? Many of you who know about Greek mythology, or indeed have visited the Louvre in Paris and seen this lovely vessel, will have heard about Niobe, but perhaps as well if you've studied Shakespeare, either currently or in the past, because when Hamlet is talking about his mother Gertrude, who he thinks is feigning to be upset over the death of the father, he talks about Niobe. She was like Niobe, all tears. So again, Niobe as someone who was in great distress has become really a watchword for someone who is very upset indeed. We'll have a look, rather than seeing the whole vessel, I'll show you close up and perhaps you can see why she was so upset. It's certainly because Apollo, bow drawn, and his sister Artemis have basically gone around skewering with their arrows Niobe's children. Not a great thing to do, even if you're a god or a goddess. And apparently, and as I put the literary reference there, that this was really retribution for Niobe boasting that she had more children than the mother of Apollo and Artemis, so that she'd born more children than Leto. And Apollo and Artemis clearly saw this as a massive slight to their mother. This scene is actually very brutal and is something which really shows the wrath of the gods and goddesses, who had even though sometimes they do seem perhaps not too bad in some respects, and you think, well, goodness me, what's wrong with being a protector of women in childbirth? Well, all I can say is just look up Artemis, see all the myths she was associated with, and some aren't particularly edifying. But for the last section, I want to see if I can try to shed a little bit of light on the inspiration for John Collier to show Artemis in the way that he did. I mean, certainly up to now, we've essentially been looking at sometimes quite elegant women in full-length clothing, but who was he actually drawing inspiration from? Was he trying to portray a 5th century BC Artemis? Well, I think you've worked out already that no, he wasn't. So where did he get the ideas from? And really, how did it become almost canonical to show Artemis really as an active hunter? Well, looking at this picture again, just to remind you, and I say if we were doing it on gallery, you'd have it right behind me. Except the good news is I wouldn't be standing in front of it today, as I probably would be had I been on gallery. You won't have to tell me to move. But here we have barefoot, athletic young woman. I mean, she is caught by Collier in the act of running. Her costume's short. She has a breast bare. She's just loosed an arrow, and she's got an ample stock in her quiver. Think again about perhaps the Artemis that appears on perhaps the most famous of all Greek monuments, that is the Parthenon on the Athenian Acropolis. And here we can see Artemis herself. Poseidon is here in the corner. If you could see the top of that, you see it's a trident, and here is her brother Apollo. This is actually, I think it is worth saying, this is interestingly one of the blocks that's in the Acropolis Museum. It's not one of those that's in the British Museum in the Javine Galleries there. So again, floor length costume. She's got her hair tied back, but what are we to make of our John Collier Artemis then? She's certainly not a 5th century lady with a long dress. So going back to basics then, who is shown in Greek art wearing short clothing? I would suggest that the first group of females you go to were the Amazons, these mythical warrior ladies of the East. I know, sort of pointing, and you know, I'm actually pointing east now, out in the East, who were depicted in Greek art either as here, fighting an individual, I'll come back to the subject in a moment, or more generally as a group, as combatants in the Amazonarchy. So that is the Amazons fighting the Greeks. And in Greek art, Amazons are depicted in quite a sporty way. So they're depicted wearing short clothing. At this stage in the later 6th century, they often don't have a bare breast. I mean, you can see here Queen Penthesilea, or indeed it is she. There's lots of writing on this pot, which does help. We've got captions already. Here is Penthesilea wearing a helmet, so you know, very sensible, and it's really obvious that she's got bare legs. I mean, she's got a short costume on. The person she's fighting is Achilles, and this is believed to be a scene from part of a lost work, the Ethiopis. This part is actually normally in the British Museum, but just like Lilith and the Atkinson, it's gone on tour at the moment, and I believe that it's on a tour of Australia, New Zealand. However, here we have late 6th century Amazon, short clothing, but no bare breast. Move on to think about what Amazons look like in the 5th century BC. And we can infer from literary descriptions that the series of bare-breasted statues, marble statues of Amazons, which we still have preserved in Roman copies, were actually created in this manner in the 5th century BC. And we can identify these Roman copies with ancient works. So, for example, from the works of Lucian, which of the works of Phidias, viz. A 5th century BC sculptor, really famous for, really renowned for his sculpture on the Acropolis in Athens and the Parthenon. Which of the works of Phidias do you praise most highly? And the reply is the Amazon who is leaning on a spear. So, for example, we have the Amazon here. Her costume looks remarkably similar to that depicted by Collier for Artemis. And this isn't a one-off. We have similar variations in lots of other museums. I mean, in Berlin, for example, in Copenhagen, but also, as you can see from the images I've selected for you, in the Capitoline Museums, Musei Capitolini in Rome, and also on the right in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. The same bare-breasted Amazons with the skirts definitely above the knee, like John Collier's depiction of Artemis. Now, it could be a stretch that, oh yes, well, he's obviously not showing Artemis, he's showing an Amazon. Well, that's only part of the story. There's a little bit more to go. Because in the 4th century BC, here we can see our friend Artemis looking very, very young, actually, I always think, in this one. She's got her hair tied back, and she's wearing some very nice hunting boots here. She's also, I think it's worth saying, a bit like me today, actually, and I'm not going out hunting, she's wearing earrings and a necklace. But most relevant to our session today, she's wearing a short costume. If you're thinking this is a truly bizarre theme, actually it is a bit, it is actually a theme from literature. It's the 3rd part of Aeschylus's Oresteia trilogy, where Apollo here is purifying Orestes. The Orestes is the main character. Yeah, well, there's a bit too much holding animals by their back legs here, isn't there? In this case, a piglet. This is the name vase of the Eumenides painter. These ladies here are the Eumenides, the Furies, the Fates, if you like, who later became the Eumenides, the gracious ones. So this is his or her name vase in the Louvre. But the important thing for us is here is Artemis in a short skirt. After the great age of vase painting has waned, I decided to look for 3rd century Artemis in terms of figurines. And this one here, showing that the image has extended beyond the Greek mainland into Greek southern Italy, so the Greek colonies. We know it was made in southern Italy. The clay is very typical of the area around, well, modern day Taranto. That's in southern Italy. If I can be colloquial here and say, it's in the instep of the Italian peninsula. If you think of Apulia being the boot heel, it's in the instep. So Artemis short-skirted. Perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that trend had clearly been established. In the 2nd century BC, here she is appearing in relief sculpture in a battle between, in the Gigantomachy, battle between the gods and the giants. Relief from the Pergamon altar now in Berlin, where you can see a short-skirted Artemis. You can clearly see she's wearing her hunting boots, but definitely with bare legs. She's actually got one of her attributes with her. Here is her hunting dog sinking his fangs into the head of this giant who's clearly trying to rip the dog's head off. But here is a very athletic looking Artemis. She's actually captured in full motion. So what we have here is really strong evidence of a change in artistic style, a change. So, for example, the sculpture on the Pergamon altar, you know, with all of these. This is the type of god who's basically half sea monster, and has got sort of curled snake's tails instead of legs. So we're seeing a very sort of Baroque, almost like a Rococo style of sculpture almost, with lots and lots of ornament. So we're following the artistic style, so we don't get the static figures of the deities anymore, but also we're getting a change in the way the deity is depicted. But finally, we've been talking about Diana for a little bit, so I thought I'd finish by showing you a very typical sculpture of, by now, Diana from the Roman period, the 2nd century AD, Diana of Versailles, Diana of Versailles. It's interesting in itself. It was apparently the first major work, the first sculpture to enter the collections of the Musée du Louvre following the French Revolution. It used to be in the Royal Collections of France, and it was a revolutionary seizure and entered the Louvre's collections. And it's a very, very fine sculpture. The last time I was in the Louvre was February 2020. And I did have problems taking my own photograph because there's always people around it. So I've used one of the Louvres here. It shows, without wanting to labour the point, a young woman wearing a short costume. In this case, her breasts are both covered. This style is very similar to the way Collier has depicted our Artemis in Southport. But you can see she has her quiver. She's actually reaching to get an arrow from it by the looks of it. She's got poor little deer here grabbing him by the head. It looks as though she's actually holding the remains of the bow. She seems to be holding like a long cylinder, which looks like that little middle bit of the bow that you hold as you draw it back. The rest has long gone. So, really, when we look at Collier's picture, and we'll have a final look at it, are we really looking at an artist who's drawn his main inspiration not necessarily from the Artemis shown in the high classical period, so the 5th century Artemis? Perhaps we are really looking at someone who has been influenced more by Roman statuary, whether it's statues such as Diana of Versailles, or did he even see some of those Amazon statues? They would certainly have been available. Although we don't have one in a UK-based collection, certainly in Europe, there would have been the opportunity to see them. And I mean, worth throwing in at this stage that Collier actually studied in Germany. So he would, I trust, have been familiar with the collections of ancient art that were being built up there. So if I can just say thank you so much for coming today. I can see that there are already some things in the Q&A and in the chat function, which I will do my best to get through in the time we've got available. But I am conscious that time is limited for the Atkinson. So I'll stop sharing. I'll hand back to Jo and I'll start reviewing some questions.
Oh, thanks, Gina. That was fabulous. Thank you so much. And joy to get back to the classics. So thank you so much for that.
Fantastic.
Can I just ask you one question before we start looking at the other things? Do you think it's a bit telling that Artemis was one of the goddesses that the Spartans sacrificed before they went on to a military campaign? It's kind of like an indicator of who they saw her, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, one thing I deliberately didn't mention here, so thank you, Jo, for giving me the entree, is really the other versions of Artemis we have. So, I mean, Jo will know this already, so for the benefit of the audience, certainly in Athens, in the Athens era, she was associated with bears, so she became Artemis Brauronia, based in Brauron in the Attica Peninsula, and also in Sparta, assimilated with Orthia, the local goddess, and someone whose work really, although she does have many of the aspects of Artemis, the thing that she does have, which does mark her out, is wings. So you can, she's in the images of Artemis Orthia that I've looked at, that particularly the archaic ones, you see her with wings. So an association with Sparta, it's there.
Yeah,
it's
fantastic.
There. If anybody does have access to libraries, I did write about material from the Artemis Orthia Sanctuary, which is in Liverpool Collections, in the annual of the British School of Archaeology at Athens a few years ago. Certainly, if you are interested in a full reference, please don't hesitate to get in touch, possibly either via the Atkinson or I'm very Googleable, put it that way.
Okay, brilliant.
No,
Thank you.
Great question, Jo.
Oh, you're welcome. I will just do a quick shout out for the next couple of talks, and that'll give you a chance to have a look at any questions that's come through. So the next thing we've actually got coming up is on the 18th of November. It's a talk called The Curated Closet, and it's by Elizabeth Montgomery, who is actually from the Grosvenor Museum in Chester, and it's looking at an exhibition that they're currently running. So we're doing a bit of study morning, so it's a little bit different, that one. That's actually in-house. But you can find all the details online. If you want to come along, Liz will be talking about the background to the exhibition, some of the stuff that they've got in their collection. It'll be followed by tea and cake, so, you know, always a bonus, and an opportunity to look around some of the exhibitions that we currently have on at the Atkinson. That one is actually £12 if you want to come along to that. The next talk we have online is on the 1st of December, which is Bernard Cornwell, the author. That one will be at 7 p.m. and it is free if you're a member of the Atkinson, or it's £5 if you're a non-member. All these things you do need to pre-book. And then the next lunchtime talk is on the 8th of December at 1 p.m. and that is Matt Fox. That's a free one. It's called I Grew Up in the 80s, and this is kind of a fun one because we're actually in the middle of installing a brand new exhibition, which is of the same title, and Matt is actually the curator of that, so he'll be talking about his love of the 80s and some of the things that he's actually got in the exhibition. So Gina, did you manage to have a look at some of the questions?
Yes, if I can just say first of all that obviously I think we all saw the message from Nelson joining us from Canada, and I've actually got a couple of my friends joining from Spain. So thank you very much. It's it really does vindicate putting these talks online. Yeah. Certainly, the lovely thing here is that do actually have a relative of John Collier in our audience today. Now, if you are the same person who I had the pleasure to meet on gallery a few years ago when I was talking about In the Venusberg, lovely that you're able to join us. Fantastic. So yeah, I do hope that we do have the opportunity to meet again, perhaps at another Collier talk. Looking as well that we have another question. Yes, from Amy. I think you can all mention them because I think you can all see the names. Who's and thank you for your kind comments. Amy's asking, do we know any preliminary sketches that he made for this painting? The difficulty is because we don't actually know the provenance. It is quite hard to track back, and certainly I haven't come across anything more on this painting, which is a shame really, because it may very well have indicated that there was a prey originally depicted. It may have indicated whether or not it was basically just, in inverted commas, a deer, you know, a stag or a young or female deer, but it could perhaps more sinisterly have indicated that she was after some human prey. Also as well, whether or not his intention was to show just Artemis on her own, or Artemis and Apollo there. So so I hope that, so sorry, you know, it's a bit of a disappointing reply, just like no, but actually not as yet. But as I think I mentioned, that my research at the moment is looking at basically how the great ages of excavation in the 19th century, early 20th century did impact on paintings of the late 19th century, early 20th century. So it may very well be that I come up with something. Now, I did notice that something had come up in a Q&A as well. So apologies, Joe, I didn't have a chance to look at this.
Okay, I've got them. Here you go. One is from Nelson, which is, are there any specific reasons for the bird breast? It reminds me of the Amazon legends of women that would remove one of the breasts to better utilise the bow.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, certainly that is something that has often been said. So no. Good question, a good question, Nelson. And certainly the idea of exposing the breast, and also the fact that it's on the right side, that if you are, I'm trying not to do the actions here because it looks so weird, but I may have to work out how it's done. If you're pulling back the string with your right hand, because you're right-handed, you're holding your bow with the left. So what's the point of the left side? It's the right side that you would need to have more flat. So yeah. Now I think I've spotted one from Julia as well. Hello, Julia. Nice that you're here. Actually, Collier could certainly have been to Oxford. Absolutely. I mean, the Arundel collection, just as a general thing for people who aren't aware, Arundel and his wife and family were early grand tourists, in inverted commas. So the collection of sculpture that he put together is actually a very, very early one indeed. So absolutely, Julia, he could certainly have gone. He could have been inspired by an Amazon statue. And, you know, thank you for reminding me of that one. And reminding me I need to go to Oxford again. It's been a long time. Too long.
Yeah, the list of places to go and see. Yeah, absolutely. Right, I think that is everything that's come in. I think so. So thanks everybody for joining us this lunchtime. Hope we'll see you all again soon.